Good evening. I'm Bill Moyers. What's more dangerous, the big stick or the big lie? Governments have used both against their own people. Tonight I'll be talking with a man who has been thinking about how we can see the developing lie. He says that propaganda is to democracy what violence is to a dictatorship. But he hasn't lost faith in the power of common people to speak up for the truth.
So there are ways of compensating for the absence of resources. People can do things. Okay, the information is there, but it's there to a fanatic, you know, somebody who wants to spend a substantial part of their time and energy exploring it and comparing today's lies with yesterday's leaks and so on. That's a research job. And it's, you know, it just simply doesn't make any sense to ask the general population to dedicate themselves to this task on every issue. I'm not given to false modesty. There are things that I can do, and I know that I can do them reasonably well, including analysis and, study, research. I mean, I know how to do that sort of thing, and I think I have a reasonable understanding of the way the world works as much as anyone can. And that turns out to be a very useful resource for people who are doing active organizing, trying to engage themselves in a way which will make it a little bit of a better world. And if you can help in those things or participate in them, well, that's that's rewarding. The point is that you have to work, and that's why the propaganda system is so successful. Very few people are going to have the time or the energy or the commitment to carry out the constant battle that's required to get outside of McNeil Lear or Dan Rather or somebody like that. The easy thing to do, you come home from work, you're tired, you've had a busy day, you're not going to spend the evening carrying out a research project. So you turn on the tube, and say it's probably right. Or you look at the headlines in the paper and then you watch the sports or something. And that's basically the way the system of indoctrination works. Sure, the other stuff is there, but you're going to have to work to find it. I feel that I'm simply helping people develop courses of intellectual self-defense.
What did you mean by that? What would such a course be?
I don't mean go to school, because you're not going to get it there. It means you have to develop an independent mind and work on it. Now, that's extremely hard to do alone. The beauty of our system is it isolates everybody. Each person is sitting alone in front of the tube. It's very hard to have ideas or thoughts under those circumstances. You can't fight the world alone. Some people can, but it's pretty rare. The way to do it is through organization. So courses of intellectual self-defense will have to be in the context of political and other organization.
You have said that we live entangled in webs of endless deceit, that we live in a highly indoctrinated society where elementary truths are easily buried. Elementary truths such as?
The fact that the military system is to a substantial extent, not totally, but to a substantial extent, a mechanism by which the general population is compelled to provide a subsidy to high-technology industry. Since they're not going to do it if you ask them to, you have to deceive them into doing it. I think there are many truths like that, and we don't face them.
And I think there are a number of pretty simple ideas that ought to define what the role of intellectuals ought to be. By intellectuals, I just mean people of relative privilege, training, resources, opportunity, an ability to be in a position where you can get involved in some fashion in affairs that matter to human beings. So it's intellectuals. It excludes, for example, a great scientist who just stays in his laboratory and wins his Nobel Prize. It excludes somebody who's working so hard putting food on the table that he just doesn't have time to think about these things. But it includes, in our societies like ours, a large group of other people. For example, anybody related to a university anyhow, because we have these privileges and opportunities. So that's roughly the category. I don't think that the role of people with some degree of privilege, say like us, should be to tell truth to power. One reason is power already knows the truth. You don't have to tell it to them. They understand it very well. That's why they're doing what they're doing. Another is that they're not the right audience. you should be reaching people who don't know the truth. Tell them. Furthermore, you shouldn't be telling them. It's not that we have some, I, you, whoever it is, has some kind of magic authority. We have our own ideas. They have their ideas. In 1975, for example, the large majority of Americans, I think, knew the truth, that the war was not a mistake. It was fundamentally wrong and immoral. You don't have to tell them the truth. You can participate with them in finding out the truth, learning it yourself, encouraging them to think it through for themselves. So you should be reaching out to other people, trying to learn the truth as best you can together with them. And it should be the audience that matters, and not the powerful. And it should be on issues that are of significance. A couple of days ago, a trial ended in The Hague, the trial of Charles Taylor for terrible crimes in Sierra Leone. The case was narrower than what the prosecutors wanted. The prosecutors, one of them's a distinguished law professor in the United States, the other a well-known barrister in London, they wanted a much broader case. They had collected, they claim, massive evidence to implicate Gaddafi in the crime. He'd been massively funding Taylor, participating, sending arms. So they wanted to broaden the case to include Gaddafi. Well, the U.S. and Britain blocked it. And the International Criminal Court, of course, takes orders from the masters. So they narrowed the case, and no mention of Gaddafi. And it's the normal pattern. The wrong kind of story must be marginalized and kept from the eyes of the public, and meanwhile we focus on the terrible crimes of others, like Charles Taylor in Sierra Leone. Now, it's pretty obvious why they wanted to cut Gaddafi out. He was a loyal friend and ally, so you don't want to implicate him. Well, now the story's changed, so we talk about what we can do about this monster. That's, again, perfectly normal. To take just one last case, in the 1970s, Saddam Hussein was an enemy. That changed in the early 80s. In fact, in 1982, the Reagan administration decided that they wanted to provide arms to Iraq, to assist in their invasion of Iran. Well, there's a little impediment. There's an institution called the List of Terrorist States, and Iraq was on the list of terrorist states. So the government had to remove Saddam from the list of terrorist states, and since there was a gap, they had to put somebody in, so they put Cuba in honor of the fact that Cuba had been the victim of really massive terrorism in the preceding several years, shooting down an airliner, killing 75 people, blowing up embassies, all sorts of crimes. So they were put in on the terrorist list to replace Saddam, who came out. The next year, 1983, we had Donald Rumsfeld going to Baghdad, shaking hands with his friend Saddam, entering into arms and other deals. This continued right through the 1980s. U.S. support for Iraq was so strong that Iraq was given a kind of a gift that no other country has except Israel. They were permitted to attack a U.S. ship and kill a couple of dozen sailors and get away with it nothing but a weak apology. Nobody can do that except for Israel, which did it in 1967. But that shows real love. The U.S. essentially entered the war. The U.S. also denied Saddam's atrocities. That's the Halabja massacre, the Al-Anfal massacres that occurred, everything denied. In fact, the administration even intervened in Congress to prevent them from issuing a declaration of censure for these huge atrocities, the worst ones of Saddam's rule. And finally, the U.S. entered the war directly, and Iran capitulated. They couldn't face U.S. participation in the war. love for Saddam continued after the war. In 1989, so that's a year after the war ended, this president was now President Bush, the first President Bush. He invited Iraqi nuclear engineers to the United States for advanced weapons training in nuclear weapons manufacture. That's 1989. A couple of months after that, President Bush sent a delegation to Iraq to convey his greetings to his friend Saddam. This was April 1990. The delegation was led by Senator Robert Dole. He was Senate Majority Leader, later Republican presidential candidate, other high-level senators. We have the transcript. They brought President Bush's greetings to Saddam. They assured Saddam that he could ignore some critical comment he was hearing in the American press. That we have this freedom of press business, so we can't figure out a way to shut them up, but you can ignore them. And in fact, the White House assured Saddam that they would remove from the Voice of America, the official international press service, eliminate a reporter who was being too critical of their friend.